everyone. Thank you for coming to the Black and Green webinar Wednesdays hosted by the St. Louis Gateway Greens and all folks across the Green Party. Thank you again for coming and for joining us on this Wednesday evening. My name is Chibu Sonye, and I will be your moderator for today. I am with the Illinois Green Party, and I am also a congressional candidate for Illinois District 13 as a write-in. We are going to be talking about degrowth, pesticides, and other kind of toxic chemicals. So you may know a veteran who has been poisoned while they were working in the military, or you know a colleague that's gotten sick from a manufacturing or a transporting job. There are people in our communities who are now living in non-livable spaces because of the pesticides, microplastics, PFAS, PFAS chemicals, nuclear materials, and the countless other toxic substances that are placed in our world with disregard for our own human health. These chemicals are disrupting the natural world and the health of our communities. And it's easy to kind of take on a tunnel vision approach of climate change and forgetting that there is an active need to restrict these chemicals that are actively known to be harmful to us and are also untested. In this webinar series, we're going to think about and challenge the concept that our politicians are not beholden to us, but are instead beholden to corporations that are actively profiting against us with this plague of toxic chemicals. We are going to explore the actions and legislative programs that are currently in existence and that we can continue to implore to cope with the pandemic of toxic chemicals and toxic dangers. Our first speaker today is Paul Cox. Paul is with the Veterans for Peace and will be describing how U.S. veterans and Vietnamese families are coping 50 years later with Agent Orange after the Vietnam War, as well as other types of toxins that our GIs were exposed to during that time. Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Can I share? Yes, there we go. Good evening. Thanks to the Gateway Green Alliance for the invitation to speak to you for a few minutes tonight about the many ways that the U.S. military has, over decades, subjected troops to toxics in a number of ways, as chemical warfare, human research subjects, and out of just basic callous indifference. I'll focus a little later on the most recent exposures, Agent Orange during the Vietnam War and burn pits in the Middle East, but I will first touch on a few historical exposures to toxics. Let's see if I can get this thing to work. There we go. So in modern times, we should start with the chemical warfare that made up part of the horror of World War I. There we go. Mustard gas killed 90,000 and maimed about
we're
a
not
million.
seeing your screen.
I'm sorry, you're not seeing the screen? Oh, I never shared it. Well, what do we do about that? There. No, that working?
Yes.
You can see my screen. Okay, good. So mustard gas was used in World War I against British, Canadian, and German troops. About 1 million people were maimed and 90,000 killed. And it was used at least a dozen times since then by many countries: Iraq, Japan, Egypt, ISIS. But the war, it was such a horrific weapon that after World War I, there were a number of international treaties that outlawed the use of mustard gas and similar warfare, chemical warfare. But it's not universally successful. The United States, for example, who is a signature of most of those treaties. Here's a photograph of a U.S. stockpile of mustard gas in 2009 at Pueblo storage facility. We don't even abide by the treaties. Well, that's not news to a lot of people. We don't abide by the treaties we sign. World War II, as we all know, ended with horrific bangs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And like boys with new toys, our government proceeded to blow up more and more bombs and more of them, such as the Marshall Islands shown here, and because of this shorter commute in Nevada. To prove that we did it to prove that our troops should not be concerned about those toys in the future wars, because many of the tests were conducted adjacent to troop units who were then marched across ground zero. Approximately 400,000 troops were exposed to above ground tests during those years at both the Marshall Islands and Nevada test site and a few other locations, and as cleanup crews in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the washdown of the ships from Marshall Island tests in San Francisco Bay, where I live, and remediation of the Marshall Islands in the 1970s, which resulted in over 6 months of exposure to those Army Corps engineers who were stuck there doing that. Little was done to evaluate their health, and they were later discharged with a warning to never tell anybody about what they had seen. And nothing was done to track their health. Also during World War II and until as late as the 1980s, human tests were conducted primarily on troops, but also on civilians in numerous places, including Edgewood Arsenal, Camp Detrick, Great Lakes Naval Base, etc. This is only a partial list of the 250 chemicals that were exposed to those military men during those tests. Some of them were poison weapons, some of them were psychotropics. The men were ostensibly volunteers, but it was well established they were never able to give informed consent because they were not told what they were being exposed to, why, or its likely medical effects, both immediately and perhaps decades afterwards. Moreover, modern existence for all of us subjects our bodies to a variety of chemical insults, such as these, but the military is high on the continuum of such exposures and includes such delights as these. One example from this list, if I may, depleted uranium ain't depleted. It is the waste product of the enrichment process used to provide fuel for both nuclear power and atom bombs, but it is still 1/3 as radioactive as pure uranium, as well as a highly toxic heavy metal. However, it makes a very effective anti-armor weapon and was widely deployed in the first Persian Gulf War in the 1990s and in 1990 and many times since, such as in Kosovo. The debris after a hit of uranium oxide, the debris after a hit is uranium oxide dust that can be quite deadly if ingested or inhaled, both as an immediate toxic chemical, heavy metal, and from the radiation that it inflicts on the lungs and bloodstream. Many first Persian Gulf War veterans and Kosovo veterans suffer from exposure to depleted uranium. On to Agent Orange. As you probably all know, our government's use of the herbicides Agent Orange in the Vietnam War started in 1961 and became a major issue during the war. These are quotes from or cuts from newspapers in 1969, 1970, and so forth. Agent Orange itself was one of 15 different herbicides used by air to spray over about 1/8 of South Vietnam's landmass. In addition, over 19 million gallons were used in the Air Force's Operation Ranch Hand, and another few million gallons were used by the Army Chemical Corps to spray into the concertina wire around hundreds of US and South Vietnamese bases and along jungle roads. And still more was sprayed from boats along the waterways of the Mekong River by the Brown Water Navy. This is the Rungsat Forest before on the left and after on the right, and a close-up down on the lower left. Agent Orange and most of the other herbicides were similar in that they were designed to kill leafy plants, the jungle vegetation that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army used for cover. However, one of them, Agent Blue, about 10% of the total used, was a different formula designed to kill grasses, which is rice. The spraying of Agent Blue to deny access to food was clearly a war crime at the time. Well, I think we can agree that the environmental destruction of South Vietnam was clearly a moral crime. Agent Orange had an additional problem. The herbicides, supposedly harmless to people, had a contaminant in them introduced during the manufacturing process. By increasing the temperature on a batch of this stuff, the cooking time was sped up, increasing the output and the profits for the 38 chemical companies that made it. This truncated batch time resulted in incomplete chemical reactions and introduced dioxin into the batch, which is the most toxic synthetic chemical ever made. In concentrations in the bloodstream of a human as small as 4 parts per trillion, it can cause illness, death, and birth defects. During the war, physicians in the south of Vietnam noticed a massive increase in the numbers and severities of birth defects in children born to women from the countryside, documenting their findings and raising the alarm. It was promptly ignored and discounted as commie propaganda in the US. However, about the same time, around 1965 in the US, the Bionetics Lab found a link between Agent Orange and birth defects in rats. Consequently, Monsanto convened a meeting of all the producers in Midland, Michigan to discuss it. They decided to do nothing. Don't want to limit profits after all, and the report remained secret until 1969. By that time, many other forces within the scientific and anti-war communities had raised very, very serious objections about it, and the program was gradually reduced until Nixon killed the ranch hand program in late 1970. However, the spraying by the Army Chemical Corps and Brownwater Navy and the South Vietnamese Army continued for some time. In the late 70s, US veterans of the war began to report strange illnesses and birth defects and developmental problems of their children, and started organizing to get the Veterans Administration to recognize their problems. In 1970, Vietnam veteran Paul Rudershan sued the chemical companies for the cancer that was killing him. It grew into a major class action suit that ended in 1984 after his death. That was the largest out-of-court settlement in history for $180 million. It was a highly flawed settlement that only covered those veterans who were sick at the time, and the maximum payout before the money was all gone was about $5,700. In addition, Judge Jack Weinstein informally promised the chemical companies that they would never have to fork over another dime. Weinstein retained jurisdiction over any subsequent lawsuits so he could keep his promise to Dow and Monsanto and Crowd, and promptly quashed any further lawsuits related to Agent Orange. So, eventually, in 1991, Congress passed the Agent Orange bill that began the VA's program of declaring certain diseases as presumptively related to a veteran's exposure to Agent Orange. The program grew to include 19 diseases with the passing of the PACT Act in 2022, which provides me with a place to pivot to discussing burn pits.
Paul, you have 1 minute.
Boy, I'll push it. Should I speak faster? Which became an issue during the forever wars in the Middle East. The military, in its wisdom, does not believe in recycling, and it certainly cannot let old military gear fall into the hands of the poor brown people who live in the countries we invade. So many of the hundreds of foreign bases in which we slither, they have dug big holes, piled in everything from food waste, packaging, computers, and even Humvees and helicopters, poured in the diesel fuel and diesel or jet fuel, and set them ablaze. The subsequent toxic smokes wafts over and around the bases in nearby towns, giving GIs and civilians big doses of God knows what, and resulting in acute, chronic, and/or delayed diseases in GIs and veterans. So the PACT Act forces the VA to recognize more than 20 diseases as presumptively due to burn pit and other toxic exposures if a veteran was stationed in or flew over Djibouti, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, et cetera, Iraq, and Afghanistan. A bunch of.
Paul, I'm sorry you have to wind it up.
Okay, I will. Lastly, the PACT Act added some consideration for those many veterans who, since 1945, were stationed in locations where they were exposed to radiation. So, while the programs I mentioned have been mostly halted, the general's constant and primary concern and the goal is that we win battles. And win or lose, they do not concern themselves with what happens next. In the service of that mission, it is not important to what happens to troops beyond what it takes to keep enough of them on their feet during the fight. I will close with that. We are on a death trip, I'm afraid. Thank you. We've got lots to do.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Really, because the idea of a disregard for our service people, it also highlights that there is in fact a role that Congress needs to play, and it's the people that pushes that forward. So thank you, Paul. Next, our second guest is going to be Chris Albright, who is an East Palestine resident and co-founder of Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers, which demands full health care for the victims of the toxic East Palestine train spill. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I'm really honored to be here and be a part of this. Like she said, my name is Chris Albright. I am a resident of East Palestine, Ohio, which, if you remember, a little over a year and a half ago, February 3rd, 2023, we had a toxic train derailment here in the town, less than a half a mile from where I am sitting right now. I'm at my home, and I watched it from my dining room window the night that it happened. And at the time that it happened, obviously we just thought it was just a train that derailed, and we wasn't that worried about, the outcome of what was going to happen. That happened on a Friday night. On Sunday, we got evacuated. And on Monday, they did a completely unnecessary controlled burn, vent and burn, as they called it. Some of the tankers that were on fire, they said they had to ignite these tankers in order to prevent them from just blowing up on their own. Some of those tankers, one of the most famous ones, not famous, but well-known ones, that was carrying vinyl chloride, which is used in making a lot of different products, including plastics, vinyl siding, different things along that line. And it is a very, very, very toxic chemical when it is burnt. So they burnt that there, and along with a lot of other cars. We found out a lot of different things since the time of the derailment of some of the things that were on those train cars, and the mix of chemicals that were ignited unnecessarily, and the different problems they cause for a lot of people. I, for one, I suffered through congestive heart failure, which progressed into severe heart failure. I have since lost my job because I was unable to work, which in turn I lost my health care, which is one of the reasons why we started the coalition that I'm part of. One of our goals is to try to get healthcare for sacrifice zones, and that'll be free for us for the rest of our lives. Because what happened here was not something that we caused or wanted. This is the result of somebody else's carelessness. Like I said, I am suffering through severe heart failure, and there's been a lot of other things that have happened. People in my own family, nosebleeds, high blood pressure, headaches, vomiting. There's a guy in town who actually just had a double mastectomy. He had breast cancer. One of the bad things about what happened here is the fact that it is very, very, very difficult to prove that any ailment that you have is directly correlated to the chemical exposure here. They did offer us a settlement, which to a lot of us in this town was a slap in the face. It was a $600 million settlement, and the lawyers are taking $180 million off the top. So residents within 2 miles are getting roughly $70,000. Out of that $70,000, you have to pay back any monies that were given to you for relocation. Me and my family had to stay in a hotel for 4 months. We ran up a $35,000 bill at the hotel, which they paid for, but now out of our settlement of $70,000, we have to pay that back. So we're going to end up with $35,000. A lot of these chemicals that were on this train, and once they were ignited, they will cause a lot of different problems down the road that we are all worried about. Cancers, so many different cancers. If you can name it, these chemicals can cause that cancer. from heart, lung, kidney, bladder, skin, all kinds of different things, brain. And that monies that they're giving us for the settlement is not going to come close to covering what's going to be needed to treat any and all of these different ailments that we're going to experience later on in life. Again, with us, pushing to try to get the Stafford Act enacted, that's going to give everybody the option to relocate and to get healthcare again for the rest of our lives. The greed off of the railroad, and one of the things we found out also too was one of the reasons why they did that vent and burn, as they called it, was the fact that they could actually get the trains running through quicker. If they would have waited for those cars to cool down, which there was evidence and proven evidence that the cars were actually cooling down. But if they waited for them, it would have taken a couple of weeks and they couldn't run their trains. If they can't run their trains, they're not going to make any money. So they decided to blow those 5 tankers up and get them out of the way so they can continue to run their trains. Another thing with this too was we also found out that this actually could have been prevented, but the railroad company wanted to save money by not using the air braking on the trains, because then they would have had to replace all the brake pads. So instead they used dynamic braking, which did not slow the train down at all, which caused the train to derail, again, a half mile from where I'm sitting right now. One of the biggest things I always like to talk about when I'm telling people about all this stuff is that this happened again, right down the street from me here. But this can and will happen again. Everybody out there lives somewhere near a train rail. They're all over the country, and we need trains in our country. What we need though is we need to have safe trains in our country. What they're doing now is they're making them longer, they're making them faster, and they're taking people off the trains. They want to get it down to where they're actually going to be remote controlled, AI. This is going to happen again. This is going to happen in your town. This is going to happen in your state. This is going to happen in your county. It's going to happen again because nobody's doing anything to stop this. So some of the things I would ask anybody to do is write your senators, write your governors, do what you can do, write to the national NTSB and get them to regulate safer railways for us. We need to have the railways, but we need them safe. This can't continue to happen, and it's going to continue to happen. And with that being said, too, a lot of people are very unaware of the fact that there are over 1,500 train derailments in the country every year. That's like 5 a day. 5 derailments a day. A lot of times they're not as bad as what this was. This train derailment was one of the biggest disasters in our history. The plume that went up covered over 16 states, where those chemicals could have fell on people and could eventually get them sick. So, like I said, I would ask everybody to please be aware of this. Another thing you can do is have a disaster preparedness kit ready, which would include having plastic sheeting for your windows, duct tape, batteries, water, canned goods, things like that. So if something like this does happen in your town, you can try to stay as safe as you possibly can for the time being. Don't end up like me with a heart failure, eventually more than likely getting cancer down the road, or knowing that my daughters might not be able to reproduce because of these chemicals. So, like I said, please, you can go onto our website at any time, Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers. We have a lot of information on there, what people can do and how people can help. But, that's pretty much what I have. So thank you for listening to me. And that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The need for healthcare, what you and the Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers are actively trying to get is not only like what's just and needed, but it's meant to address the human tolls that these toxins and chemicals and greed ends up taking. There's a real practical human toll, and there is active things that we can do like making demands like you all did to pressure our legislators to make those differences and to make it so that we're actually safe and healthy down the road, that and our children. So thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Up next is going to be Tamela Trussell. They founded Move Past Plastic, a grassroots organization addressing plastic social and environmental injustices. They help communities move towards a regenerative economy, which I think is right along what Chris is advocating for. We need something different, and they are going to show us how. Tamela.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me here this evening, and let's see if I can get my slideshow. All right. So yes, tonight we're going to talk about why plastic is the keystone issue and how Move Past Plastic is tackling it. You're going to learn about that plastic is more than litter, it's microplastics, chemical toxicities. You're going to learn a little bit about one of the chemicals out of the 1,600 that are in plastics, and then learn a few things that Move Past Plastic is doing to tackle them. Because I have 10 minutes, I might end up skipping slides or clipping through them very quickly. All right, so I want to recognize that we are on Susquehannock tribal lands. And I normally say more on this, but we're going to skip ahead. I'm also in the Conneaut Creek watershed. And I love the creek, and if we don't protect our watershed, we don't protect us. These are just some of our partners nationally and locally. And I'm Tamela Trussell, and I started in 2021. We try to use educational outreach opportunities like this and resources and networking to help mitigate the plastic issues of single-use plastic within our communities and across our communities. So why is plastic the keystone issue? Well, you have to understand how plastic is made. So it's made through extraction, fracking, then you get ethane gas. It goes to a cracker plant where that ethane is broken, and they form little plastic pellets called nurdles. Those get shipped to manufacturers to get pushed through extruders and molders. Voila, you get plastic, and then 44% of it is single use, and it gets disposed in under a minute time. So this whole process uses lots of greenhouse gas emissions and is over 10% of greenhouse gas emission to our climate currently. Also, you need to understand that recycling is a myth perpetuated by the petrochemical industry. Only 9% of all plastic has been recycled, and currently it sits at 6%. Plastic is so much more than litter. It turns into micro and nanoplastics. That means 5 millimeters or less, which is about the size of your pencil. These microplastics, plastics, litter, whatever, can have up to 1,600 chemicals in them. And they are very hazardous to human and wildlife in our ecosystems. In fact, 4,200 of them are hazardous to us. So you'll notice this graph shows the chemical production, and look how steeply that's going up. One chemical is created every 1.4 seconds, added to 350,000 chemicals we already have. And you can see plastic is takes on most of those chemicals, the production of it. So microplastics in chemicals They are in our water cycle, circulating everywhere, and they're in everything. There's no place you cannot find it. They are impacting our air, water, and soil and plant growth. In fact, the Stockholm Convention says that these novel entities in the lower left corner are past the planetary boundary of safety, which means what the Earth can absorb, dilute, or break down. And you can see it's much worse than even climate change in the top middle area there. One particular alarming chemical, although there are many, as already been stated, including polyvinyl chloride and dioxins and a whole plethora, but is PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are a fluorine carbon bond, which is the strongest bond. So these chemicals, like plastics, can take decades and really honestly centuries and thousands of years to break down. So they're ubiquitous in our ecosystems and are bioaccumulating through our food chain. They were created, as in most things, through war to use to coat the tanks because they resist heat, oil, and water. Hence, in the graph, you can see that the petrochemical industry uses a lot of them, but they're in all kinds of things. And you can see plastic resin is in there because when every plastic, whether it's intentionally added or not, every piece of plastic has PFAS on it. Because when they push it through the molder and the extruder, the plastics get coated with PFAS in order to prevent the extruders and molders from gunking up. So these are just some of the areas that you can find them. So like your biosolids are just like containers for collection of the PFAS that come from our use of our other products, tires, medical equipment, textiles, agriculture, pesticides, plastic litter. But they're PFAS are found in everyday common products, from waterproof makeup, diapers and period pads, to your cell phones, contact lenses, fishing line, paper, printing ink, you name it, it's in there. One quick thing that you can simply do to avoid microplastic and chemical toxicities from them is dust your house, mop. I know it sounds crazy, but honestly, that's the best thing you can do. And then quit buying plastic-laden textiles, so polyester, nylon, etc. So PFAS alone has been linked to some of these health problems. The other chemicals, which, 16,000 chemicals, 4,000 some plus are hazardous, also will perpetuate some of these and other health impacts as well. It's so critical that the microplastics and their chemical toxicities have crossed over to the blood-brain barrier, the placental barrier. They're in breast milk, bottled water, tap water, and everything. So what is Move Past Plastic doing to address this plastic invasion? So we do public education and outreach through speaking, watch parties, sign-on letters, petitions, and social media. We write letters to the editor and our legislators. We do functions at Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania. We outreach to companies and give them specific things that they can do to address single-use plastic. We go to tabling events, another educational outreach. We also work with other community organizations. This one was to teach about watersheds, and we did a presentation and then hosted a canoe paddle, because if you don't get out and appreciate what you're trying to protect, it falls short, and people need to understand the whole connection there. We hosted a fast fashion show to highlight fast fashion, and all the models were just regular people wearing reused clothing. Two of our big campaigns right now are addressing single-use plastic reduction and our Creek Defenders program. So the reduction program is trying to get our schools and restaurants to go to reusables, dishware instead of disposables. You can start off with bring your own, skip the stuff, maybe just get your restaurant to quit putting out straws on the table and make people ask for them. You can start small and go big. We work with municipal bag bans. And then our latest big effort is the Creek Defenders project, where we are trying to identify point and non-point source pollutants in the Conneaut Creek. And then
Have 1 more minute.
there's my couple more slides here. And then within that, we are going to identify the major points of concern in the chemical, and to decide where to further test, monitor, and remediate. We hope that this will become a model for other watersheds to use. This one creek is going into that Conneaut Creek. There is a legacy landfill of tire, rubber, and carpet that's leaking leachate into this stream. And this Conneaut Creek provides drinking water for about 40 municipalities. The last thing is synthetic turf. The Creek Defenders program has a pollution report form where you guys can report any pollutants. It'll upload to a public map along with regulatory, academic, citizen science data. This is one big thing we are working on here for citizen science. You could also report diseased and dead wildlife. This is an example of a handful of firsthand reports that we have collected so far. And that's it. Thank you so much. If you want to learn more or participate in any of these activities to tackle single-use plastic, you can go to Move Past Plastic. And I'll stop sharing.
Hey, thank you so very much. Class those plastics and what it can look like for the future. Our fourth speaker of the night is Julio Cesar Herrera. They are the Assistant Executive Director of the Black Institute, and they will explain how they are addressing the use of pesticides, particularly in public parks, with a focus on environmental racism, which is very, very real. Okay, Julio, all you.
Hi, everyone. Let me just start by saying thank you to everyone who presented previously. Chris, especially, I feel like your story was, it honestly just broke me to hear what you and your community had to go through. So thank you for sharing that story, first and foremost. But to summarize, my name is Julio Herrera. I belong to the Black Institute. We are an action tank that focuses on policy and advocacy for Black and Brown communities in New York State. And environmental racism and environmental justice are core tenets of some of the work that we do. For those that don't know, New York has had one of the most heavy-handed sorts of redlining and environmental racism that came with it. To just give a clear example from my personal experience, I originate from South Brooklyn, and in South Brooklyn, there's the industrial zone, which consists of a lot of working class Black and brown laborers who live adjacent to the Gowanus Canal, which is one of the most polluted bodies of water in the state, if not in the entire East Coast, with runoff from industrial waste and sewage just contaminating the water with the to the point of airborne toxins affecting residents of the area, giving high amounts of respiratory issues and carcinogenic problems. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about Intro 1524, which was the law that New York City Council passed in 2021, banning the use of glyphosate-based pesticides in New York City public parks. This was, in my opinion, it was a turning point in, reducing New York's carbon footprint. That, along with Local Law 97, meant to promote neutral carbon emissions in new constructions, more than 25,000 square feet in new buildings in New York City. When this law was passed, we were very optimistic and eager to work with the New York City Parks Department, where our coalition offered to employ organic land management practices to train the Parks Department on how to better manage their sites. Since then, it's been a mixed bag, to put it generously. So we hosted our first demonstration site in Morningside Park, right in Harlem, last year on June 1st, 2023. The overall result was a success. We produced high amounts of, the soil quality was top notch, and we were able to produce a high amount of grass growth, and all that without the use of any heavy chemical-based fertilizer or any glyphosate-based pesticides again. Since then, it's been a little mired in some of what's been going on here in New York. Chief among them, the budget cuts that our mayor introduced at the beginning of the year. It had a major setback in terms of staffing and in terms of the capabilities that the Parks Department had when it came to buying supplies and managing each site borough by borough. Now that that issue has been more or less resolved, we've still had a couple of obstacles. Chief among them is the lack of council oversight in regards to this program. Well, let me not say it's a program, it's the law. In council oversight in enforcing this law. Since then, since I want to say the beginning of the year, this has been more of an internal project by the New York City Parks Department. They're managing the budget, they're managing the allocations, and which sites are being used as demonstration sites, which we're now calling a pilot program. What that means is that we don't really know how the Parks Department is upkeeping a lot of these sites. And we don't know if they're still using these pesticides or if they're using any sort of other highly chemical-based fertilizer to upkeep a lot of the land, which still leads to more complications for any residents hoping to sit in the park, have a picnic, be on the grill, not knowing that that day could be their last day as a healthy person in the city. This is still a work in progress. I can't promise what the next steps will be, but our organization, along with a lot of our coalition partners, are working hard to make sure that this law is enacted in place, that New York steers in the right direction and can lead the charge for a lot of environmental reform and environmental justice. So thank you.
Rock on. I love to see that you all are working with our public parks as a means to address racism. New York is going definitely through a lot of stuff. So thank you for coming here and sharing with us across the nation of what you all are doing in your neck of the woods, or I guess your neck of the parks. Thank you for our main speakers. We are now going to move into special comments. We do have 5. First, I want to take a moment and say, participants, thank you for staying with us. You probably have questions or thoughts, particularly questions. We have a question and answer section after the special comments, but you can start writing in some of your questions there if you would like. Next up, for our special comments is going to be Bob Grove from the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's just been a wonderful insight. I am the president of the Climate Council. I'm also the executive producer of the Climate Hour radio broadcast and the author of Grove's Field Guide to Plastics. And what I wanted to comment on is some of the things I discovered during my research for this book. Tamela did a wonderful job of of summarizing all of the problems we have in plastic and, kind of describing that fossil fuel to plastic pathway. The takeaway from that, the key point is that plastics are still fossil fuels. It's still crude oil. It's still natural gas. They're even converting coal to plastics these days. China's big on that because they don't have the raw crude oils that other countries do. So they're actually converting their coal to methanol and then cracking that down into the monomers and creating the polymers and such to build the plastics. Very dirty process. So this process of converting fossil fuel to plastics actually has greater impacts on global warming and climate change than our cars, our normal things. The thing to understand about this process is that renewable energy is here to stay. Everybody recognizes that it's now cheaper per kilowatt to produce power with renewable sources than fossil fuel. So the oil companies are seeing that writing on the wall, and they are moving their money and their fossil fuels as quickly as they can into plastic production. I think the CEO of BP has been quoted as saying by 2045, 95% of all of their fossil fuel extractions will be moving into plastics. So, the impacts aren't going away. The oil companies, renewable energy is not going to make fossil fuels go away. The oil companies are just redirecting all their fossil fuel extraction away from energy production and into plastic production. So, solar, wind, electric vehicles, they're not going to make the fossil fuels go away. It's just going to end up in our consumer plastics. But it's even worse. I mean, we're talking about climate change here. The great part of my research was into the health conditions. And, Tamela did a good job talking about the chemicals, the PFAS, the forever chemicals. Bit of trivia there, the first original forever chemical was created by DuPont. It was actually nonstick cookware. So, if you're using that nonstick cookware, that's just pure PFAS going into your foods. But the tens of thousands of chemical additives that are used in the plastic are causing all kinds of health issues. There's the PFAS and such that Tamela talked about. There's the BPAs that harden plastic. We've all seen BPA-free plastics now because, we've proved that that is a health hazard. So they've gotten rid of that, but then they replace that with BPS. We've now proved that that's a health hazard. So they're getting rid of BPS and they're now bringing up BPF. The cycle here is that the chemical companies, fossil fuel companies, same thing. They put a product out there that they basically know is hazardous. Their internal research shows that problem. And they're going to run it as long as they can until there's enough research and public pushback that it needs to be replaced. And then they just bring the next chemical up to do it. The next chemical is going to have the same hazards as the first, but you still have to go through another 10-year cycle to prove that. So the chemicals keep going. PCBs make plastics flexible. I mean, we had a PCB crisis probably 40, 50 years ago, and it was banned. But we still see PCB derivatives used as plastics to make them more flexible. Flame retardants is a big one. What was it? The brominated flame retardants. Brominated have been banned, so now they went to chlorinated, and after that, they're now in phosphate flame retardants. These all have direct health impacts, and not a lot of time here, so we'll just keep moving. My book cites over 300 studies. These studies that are demonstrating that rats that drink water containing microplastics causes dementia. You wonder why we have more dementia these days than we did 30 years ago? It's the microplastics crossing our brain barrier. The PFAS that are affecting obesity. What's our obesity epidemic? It's caused by plastics, all of these things. So really the solution is to stop using plastics. What I've done with my book is end each chapter with talking points that you can share with your friends, family, and discuss these issues, and end each chapter with action items, things you can do. For instance, in the Living Without It section, looking at food plastics, we present a grocery plastics challenge that gives you methods of grocery shopping so that you end up with less plastic in your cart. Just to summarize, the thing I want to say is that we as individuals can eliminate up to 80% of the plastics in our life. I've been working on that for about 3 years now, and I'm surprised at how easy that is. I mean, plastics are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. A lot of times you think that, well, there's nothing I can do, I just have to live with this. Well, the fact is there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of alternatives, and if you're willing to take the time and effort to learn about them and practice these things, you can create a clean, healthy, safe environment to live in.
Okay.
So
Sorry, your time is
if you
up.
want to
Thank
learn
you.
more, please check out the book. If you want to reach me, I'm at info.wordsinger.net. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Bob. And yes, please grab their book and stuff because it's going to be really good information. And if you're a reader, be great. You could also get it at the public library, probably. Awesome. Our next special comment will be Daniel Digger Romero, who is from the No Spray Coalition and the St. Louis Green Party.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Daniel Digger Romano of the Green Party of St. Louis. And our St. Louis No Spray Coalition, we're working as 140 cities in this country, or I believe in North America actually, have already done, is a ban on pesticides. There are cities, that have partial and full bans on pesticides. And I want to give a shout out to the Black Institute of New York City. We heard Julio speak before. We read their paper, The Poison Parks. I recommend anyone read it. It talks about the environmental racism as how in poor and neighborhoods with majority people of color, the parks there they found get more than their share of pesticides. And I must say, Julio, I really feel you because we had to go through so much. They call it a sunshine law request to get the records here in St. Louis, and what a struggle that was. And then we found a few sympathetic aldermen, on the city council, but the Parks Department, again, very resistant. And they started saying things like understaffed, no budget for this, etc., etc. And, and the record keeping that, again, that reminded me of our struggle. They don't keep really good records. And because of that, we weren't able to see exactly how much they were using in each park. So even though we found some indications of environmental racism as far as pesticide use in St. Louis, there was not enough to prove it because of their sloppy record keeping. And I think that the deeper problem is that, pesticides are sort of like a silent killer. Certainly we heard, the Mr. Albright there, Bob Albright, talk about, when you have a train full of toxins explode, pesticides are really silent because you don't see it, and the industry propaganda assures us that they're safe. And I think this is one of the biggest hurdles, is because I still see, and you probably see it in your community too, people will be spraying Roundup, which contains glyphosate, a known carcinogen. There's no doubt about it. You can see it. The evidence is out there, scientific evidence. And yet I'll see people with no gloves on, no protective equipment at all. And, if I talk to them, I'll say, will you just read your label instructions? Because it says, cover your arms, use gloves, and don't get any on your skin. Because these pesticides, what happens, or in this case, herbicide, they have surfactants, they're called. And what they do is they get on the surface of the plant, and the surfactant helps it absorb into the plant. So if you get some on your skin, guess what? The surfactant will get this poison into your system faster. And I think it's the public perception is really why I was willing to take on this issue, despite the, resistance we get from the parks and, indifference from some people. Because as we know, these things are causing cancers and all sorts of ailments. And I think our goals are to get the word about pesticides out. And because they're so ubiquitous, it's not only used for lawn care and landscaping. In our agricultural systems, there is more and more pesticides. And just as another speaker mentioned, that if you get a ban on one or restriction on one, they just go to another one that's as equally as bad and toxic, or in some case worse. As I say, though, we've also worked with Beyond Pesticides, and you can go to their list of non-toxic communities. If you do a search, you'll find it. I don't have the link. And you'll see there are so many cities now that have partial or full bans. Some have gone fully organic, and they're making it work. They're making it work. And we're trying to make it happen here in St. Louis, and I think we can make it work. And I think I'll just leave it there. I heard the call. Thank you very much. An excellent panel tonight. I'm impressed by everyone that's talked.
OMG, thank you so very much, Danielle. Woody Powell is with the Veterans for Peace. Please speak your special comment. Oh, Woody, you are muted for a hot sec. Perfect.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep.
Good. I've got a thing on my screen here. I think I was asked to contribute to this thing because I was in Korea in 1952 and 53 when there was a pretty extensive campaign against malarial mosquitoes conducted, which amounted to C-47s flying over our units and spraying us with DDT. We didn't know that. We didn't know what it was. I was in a canine unit, and when these planes came over and started belching these clouds of stuff, we dove for our tent. But our dogs were outside on chains next to their foxholes, and they got a dose. Well, we were fortunate in that we had access to some running water. We had tapped into a water line illegally, and we had some running water, so we were able to wash our dogs very thoroughly. But thinking back on that, there were lots of, besides the direct contact that the GIs had with DDT, and we do know about the effects of it, and it's pretty extensive, and neurological problems and birth defects and all that sort of thing. The indigenous community there, the Korean families that were living around our base, they were exposed to this stuff. And as I understand it, the long-term effects are very much like Agent Orange in that they were passed down. Women who were pregnant gave birth to deformed babies. Women who had already given birth were breastfeeding their babies and poisoning their children without even knowing it. So it was a really disastrous thing. And this was all before Rachel Carson and her Silent Spring brought DDT to our attention. At least that was the first time I'd heard about it. So that's just a little bit of history on the use of pesticides in a very indiscriminate way in the military. And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We next have Emma Jane Pullman from the Green Party of Hawaii. Hello.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Emma Jane Avila Pullman, and I am the Green Party candidate for United States Senator of Hawaii 2024. A little about me. I was born in the Philippines on June 27, 1987, and attended school in both the Philippines and Southern California. I studied philosophy and political science at USC and earned my Juris Doctorate and Mediator Certificate at Loyola Law School. I'm an earth lawyer and mediator. My clients include earth, the Hawaiian honu, monk seals, eo, dolphins, nene, and the Waipio Valley wild horses. I study Plato, and my politics are universal. I believe in fundamental core principles and good government. My primary platform is water. Water is life, love, and the most important element in the world. Everyone on earth is entitled to clean water because clean water is a fundamental human right and a necessity for life. It is the primary responsibility of all global leaders to make sure that all people on earth have access to clean water and all waterways and water bodies are clean. According to the United Nations, approximately 30% of the global population does not have access to clean water. I genuinely believe that the reality of Earth's water crisis is far more severe. And these numbers are closer to 40%, if not 50%. The reason why I believe this is because many people on Earth are not accounted for, especially people living in third world countries where water is the most contaminated. I also believe this because I grew up near the Pasig River and the provinces of the Philippines. I see the Ganges River in India and Alawai here on Oahu and all other polluted water sources on Earth. Earth's water crisis is a serious problem. Hawaii is in a state of emergency with respect to water. The Red Hill fuel crisis contaminated a water aquifer supplying water to approximately 77% of Oahu's residents. Alawai is a biohazard, an open cesspool in the middle of Honolulu. Resorts and coastal properties are dumping waste and toxic chemicals into the ocean. In June, 607,000 gallons of waste was dumped into Hilo Bay, causing extreme bacteria contamination. The water on Mauna Kea is contaminated due to high levels of military activity. Puna geothermal venture is contaminating the water on Big Island, blasting toxic fumes at residents in Puna and lying on environmental reports. Despite the protections of the Clean Water Act, our water sources continue to become more and more contaminated. Hawaii's oceans are polluted with plastic waste, pollution, and toxic algae. The turtles are showing signs of vitamin deficiencies and malnutrition. Our monk seals are starving to death because there is no more fish. Water is a serious crisis that politicians cannot continue to ignore. The biggest problem on Earth right now is the destruction of our life sources. Politicians want to call this climate change, global warming, or whatever made up political terminology they come up with. In reality, what's happening is we are destroying our life sources by contaminating our water, air, food, and cutting Earth's trees, which are our primary oxygen sources. This is not sustainable. We cannot continue to pollute the water and cut all of Earth's trees and expect that everything will be fine. Clean water affects all of life and all of Earth. It is not rocket science that drinking contaminated water will lead to physical illness and death. Why wouldn't the same logic be true for the species that live in the ocean? In order to solve climate change, we must first correct the narrative to be more transparent and reflect the reality of what is really happening on Earth, which is a destruction of our life sources, specifically water, air, food, and trees.
You have 1 minute.
Water is life because life needs and thrives in water. Wherever there is water source, there's also life. Pesticide is another word for poison. Pesticides were created for the purpose of killing cockroaches and other insects with hard exoskeletons. These insects literally survived the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's important to understand that if something can kill a cockroach, you better believe it can kill you too. Spraying poison on plants and trees seeps into the soil and ultimately contaminates groundwater, which is our drinking water. Whatever doesn't seep into the soil ends up in the ocean through stormwater or irrigation runoff. These poisons contaminate the water and kill vital life sources for all marine life in the ocean, including destroying coral reefs, fish, plankton, and other food sources. This needs to be corrected immediately. I support a total ban on pesticides in America. I'm running for United States Senator of Hawaii to clean Hawaii's water because cleaning all of Earth's water is necessary for the future of life. All global leaders need to stop fighting and focus on preserving and cleaning Earth's water for all life on Earth. Thank you. Aloha. God bless Hawaii and God bless America.
That was absolutely beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. I'm awe-inspired. Everyone, this is future Senator of Hawaii, Emma Jane. Okay, yes, it would be great. Our next special commenter will be Dave Molinix of the Green Party of Hawaii as well.
Aloha, I'm Dave Molinix with the Green Party of Hawaii. I'm also co-founder of 350 Hawaii and of Greenpeace Hawaii and the Hawaii Climate and Environmental Coalition, which is made up of about 40 climate and environmental organizations working together to do whatever we can to mitigate and stop climate change. They asked me to talk about, well, we have several things we've worked on here and had success with, and a little bit of success anyway. GMO, we have GMO problem, we have the microplastics, and we have our Red Hill fuel tanks leaking into our drinking water from the Navy. I'll start talking briefly about the GMOs. The GMOs, I don't know if you know about too much about them, but basically the companies that come up with, the chemical companies that they can stitch some of their DNA into the corn crop, and then the pesticides they use to spray on that corn crop would not kill it, but it would kill all the other plants. And but eventually the other plants start realizing that they can fight against this, that all the bugs, etc., and they get stronger. So you have to put on more and more pesticides. And this has been devastating to Mexico, where they got the Mexican people to stop using. They've been growing corn for thousands of years. They had these, little farms that they took care of their folks for, like, centuries. And it's a fallback. So they get a job, and the job, go back home, grow corn, you're good. But there was a drought, and they were stuck with these GMO corn. They didn't have their seeds anymore. So that's why I had this huge influx of people on our southern border who can't grow food anymore, and there's no jobs in Mexico City, and so they've fled up to our southern border. So the chemical companies thought, hey, wow, Hawaii's got this really great climate, and rather than just doing one crop a year of these to test our pesticides, we could do 3 a year in Hawaii. And so they started doing that, and so then but people started seeing some problems, birth defects, increased rates of cancer and asthma. And so the chemical companies do what they always do. They hit it. Then they knew full well that they were poisoning people. They know that before they start, that they hit it. Then they moved into denial. We don't know what you're talking about. It couldn't be us. And then they moved from there into misleading and deceiving, and eventually just blatant lying. So they got all their experts to come out and say, hey, everything's fine here. But as they were doing these pesticides on the fields, they were doing it like right next to schools, hospitals, childcare centers. It's blowing right into the windows, and the kids are breathing it in, and the hospital patients are breathing in. The little kids are breathing in at the daycare centers. People's homes is blowing into their homes, and the pesticide somebody says, no, it's not us. We know what the problem is. So people got together and said, okay, we got to shut these guys down. We had to get our own experts, and then we had to do testimonies and stuff like that. Of course, they brought out all their big scientist guys to say everything is fine. And of course, then they used the other club, which was jobs. A lot of people in Kauai on Maui were working for those companies that were spraying, making good money finally, because not a whole jobs over there. And so we can't lose our jobs. How do we know that this is connected to these pesticides? We don't know that. It's like, well, we weren't having these problems before, so we're pretty sure. So they did. The Kauai County Council passed the legislation to ban these pesticides, the glyphosates, and but we were sued by the chemical company, and the chemical company prevailed. So they overruled us. And so, okay. So then, but the news was out there. People were alerted. It was a big smear on them. They were looking really bad. And so we did pass a law eventually to ban use of pesticides around Hawaii schools, and that they have to, we require mandating disclosure of the pesticides they're using, and buffer zones. We wanted 500 feet, we got 100 feet. And also, but this has been enough to impact the GMO companies, and they have dropped down their production of and use of our lands down to 50%. So we've cut them in half. And now they're, instead of having open air testing of their pesticides, they are using big greenhouse facilities. So we minor win there, but it's a win. So well, yeah, it's a step in the right direction. But these are very dangerous. And if you're curious about if there's GMO in your products, they prevent us from putting that on the food supplies. They're saying, here, watch out, there's GMOs in here, because you can get it from the food itself. But you just look for products that say non-GMO product. And so we did the reverse. The people just had to do the reverse because the chemical company prevented us from putting labeling on there to say that there's GMO. So pretty much if it's a corn crop or it's going to have GMOs in it. Thank you very much. And thank you all for all your hard work protecting our climate, our environment, and the people. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, everyone. With the knowledge imparted by our speakers, comments shared by our special guests, we are now invited comments from the representatives of our co-sponsoring organizations. We do have a list, and we'll go in order that has already been given out. You can either share a comment or you can ask a question to our speakers. If you have a question to a speaker, please state that speaker's name and then followed by your question, so it is logical for the people who will be answering. Okay, yeah. First is Don Fitz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Don Fitz. I do a lot of work in coordinating these webinars. I wanted to tell everybody that a month from now, actually it's going to be November the 13th, we're going to have a program on degrowing the military while preserving jobs, which is going to have a huge overlap with what we've covered now, except the focus is going to be on the military. We're going to, and how to degrow it. We're going to have Christian Sorensen, who's author of Understanding the War Industry, how it fits into the whole capitalist framework. We're going to have Dr. Ho Chi Lin speaking to us from London. He is with Tipping Point North South. He's one of the few people who writes connecting degrowth with military production, which is very often ignored. We're going to have Katerina Canyon, who's the executive director of the Peace Economy Project in St. Louis. And she's going to be talking about their research showing how Boeing could redirect its energies into producing things for the St. Louis community rather than bombs, and which would be a model for us to think about everywhere. Sheraton Gosta Murphy is going to speak to it. He's from the American Indian movement. He's going to talk about how Native Americans have been suffering from the things like mining uranium and many other toxins that go through the reservations, and the many demonstrations that have addressed that. I'm going to be speaking last, and what I want to cover is the complexities of actually degrowing the military and reducing it, because it's a huge sector of the overall economy. And you really, it's not realistic to say we're just going to stop Boeing from producing. We're going to put all the military companies out of business. Where do people work? They can't necessarily do windmills and solar panels because, like Bob Grove explained, then you have a whole new form of toxins. And of course, since they tend to occur in the colonies, what you do is that you would then have the invasions that would be necessary to produce all these things for windmills and solar panels to produce the number of toxic chemicals. And you'd have to have a whole new war economy to suppress people around the world to allow these products to be constructed. So really, we're going to look at the complexities of that, as well as how the military industrial complex is interwoven with all other parts of the economy and what we need to do to reduce that. Usually we have programs the first Wednesday of the month, which would be November the 6th, which would be the day after the election. We figure people will still be reeling from the election. And so the program will be a week from that, November 13th, which is one of the rare times that we have a program the second Wednesday of the month. Okay, thank you very much, Barbara.
Time's up. Okay.
Wonderful. Steve.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me here, and also Chris. I'm with the Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers, and also Work Week. And this struggle, I think, in East Palestine really represents all the communities around the United States who've been contaminated and poisoned. It's not just East Palestine, but that is most representative because in the process of this catastrophe, man-made catastrophe and the poisoning, they discovered that the government, EPA, CDC was not interested in really protecting them, and actually just signed a settlement agreement, which doesn't provide health care and compensation to move out of their homes. These families are actually stuck in their homes. They don't have money to move out, and their homes are contaminated. So their children are being poisoned. So our coalition wants to focus on that, and with the demand on Biden and AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler that it be made a Stafford, under the Stafford law, be made a mass casualty incident site. So under that act, they can get health care for the rest of their lives, and also can get money to move out of that place. So on October the 18th, Friday, October the 18th at noon, we're going to be having a rally in front of the EPA at 1200 Pennsylvania Avenue. The Green Party, I understand, is endorsed, but we want people from around the country and the East Coast, particularly the Midwest, to come to Washington and to get other communities that have been contaminated. One of the reasons they don't want to institute the Stafford Act is there are many other communities in Ohio and Missouri that have the same thing. In the Bay Area, where I'm from, Hunters Point and Treasure Island is a radioactive dump site, former military base, and people have been contaminated with radioactive material and gotten cancer.
You have 30 seconds.
If we can win this fight and get this act instituted, and Biden is a lame duck, that would be a victory for the people of East Palestine and really show people that you can get health care. So I'd urge everyone to endorse it. The Green Party, I think, is endorsing it. Put the word out, contact Biden, contact also Liz Schuler, the AFL-CIO, and call them to support this demand to institute the Stafford Act so that they can get health care and compensation to move out of their contaminated homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to invite Pat.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm with Military Poisons. I'm actually in Maryland, about 2 hours south of Washington. And I'd like to speak very briefly about PFAS emanating from military bases. I've tested about 420 different streams and rivers flowing from military bases in the United States, in Europe, and Japan. And PFAS, the chemical we're most worried about is PFOS. It's one of 16,000 chemicals, and it bioaccumulates in fish, according to the EPA, up to 4,000 times its level in the water. That's big. So we have been testing the waters near these Navy bases and Army bases and Air Force bases. And, if the water has 10 parts per trillion of PFOS, and the EPA says that it can be 4,000 times greater than that, than that in a fillet of fish, that means that you're going to have fish with, 40,000 parts per trillion in its fillet. But if the water has 100 parts per trillion of PFOS, you're going to have fish with 400,000 parts per trillion. And we see that all over the country. But if the water has, say, 1,000 parts per trillion, and I tested the water outside of Joint Base Andrews and added 3,000 parts per trillion, then you can expect fish to have 4 million parts per
30
trillion.
seconds.
Yeah. So the EPA is trying to keep these chemicals as PFOS to 4. And, we have fish near here with several million parts per trillion. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Matt.
Yes, hello. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this time. I'm Matt Stiles. I'm with the Green Party of Utah. And right now, everyone is aware of the tragedy that's happening over there in North Carolina. I live in Utah now, but I was born in the Carolinas. And my father grew up in North Carolina in a poor family who barely made it by on food stamps and the community food bank. The residents there right now are currently suffering from the hurricane, but even before that, they were suffering from pollution and exploitation at the hands of corporations in the pork industry. Vast open cesspools of toxic animal waste from their factory farms are placed right across the street from poor and minority residential neighborhoods. And even worse, the pools are then sprayed into the air as a method of disposal under the pretense of irrigation. And this egregious case of environmental racism, the harmful and even deadly impact of this on the residents is well documented. It's indisputable. And yet the industry continues because all the lawyers and the politicians are all in the pocket of the corporations. They have all the political power there. And the thing is, the corporation, the main perpetrator, Smithfield Foods, they also operate facilities right here in Utah. And activists here have challenged them in court as well with some limited success. But they're operating in many other states all across the country.
30 seconds.
And animal agriculture itself is just a blight across our country. We need to cut any and all subsidies to it and strip it of its power. And we need to end its exploitation of animals and their harming and polluting of our most vulnerable communities. I appreciate y'all hearing me out on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm seeing a theme where everything is connected. Fred, I'm gonna invite you up to the stage.
Hey, my name is Fred McCann. I'm up here in Portland, Maine. I am currently elected to the Board of Trustees of the Portland Water District, where I serve as Vice President. And we are the largest water utility in Maine. We serve about 60% of Maine's population. Luckily for us, we do not currently have PFAS in our water supply, but Maine has kind of two crises going on right now. There's been a history of decades of using sludge for fertilizer on farms, and now we have several farms that are contaminated with PFAS. And recently on August 19th in Brunswick, Maine, there was a firefighting foam spill that leaked PFAS into the environment. The EPA sets the limit at 4 parts per trillion. The PFAS firefighting foam that was spilled in Brunswick had about 3.2 billion parts per trillion, and that's trying to be cleaned up right now. So in Maine, we have passed laws for reporting PFAS in products. We have passed a law to ban PFAS to phase it out by 2032. And we have passed a law for those contaminated farms to be used as solar farms. So we're working on things, but what I would like to impose upon everyone to think about tonight is we're thinking about these larger, bigger picture problems of how do we get PFAS banned or how do we get microplastics banned. The reality is there's a long tail to this. I have, a pair of LL Bean boots that are 15 years old that have Gore-Tex in them. Long after we ban PFAS, PFAS is still going to be going into the wastewater systems. It's still going to be going into landfills. We have to fund the cleanup for that. As it stands today, at least 2 water systems in Maine are building new filters to filter PFAS out of drinking water. They'll cost hundreds of millions of dollars, up to $500 million. Right now, there's a class action lawsuit against 3M and DuPont. 3M alone might pay out $10.5 billion, but that's for every water system in the nation. It's not enough. So what I want everyone to think about is how are we going to fund these things? Because right now today, we don't have the technology to remove PFAS from wastewater and sludge. That's going to come online soon. And that means your water bill might go up because your water district might have to figure out how to pay for that. We pay for that through rate increases, through bonds and grants from EPA state revolving funds. So everyone is doing a great job thinking in the big term, but I want everyone to think about running for your local water district, running for your local sanitary district, and running for your city council. Because even in the smallest town, you will direct millions of dollars in spending how we will clean up this problem and manage it over the decades. Because even if we stop it all tomorrow, we still have to take care of that cleanup today and tomorrow and for years to come. So that's all I've got for you folks. That's what we're thinking about up here in Maine, how we're going to manage that problem. And it's a tricky one. But everyone, really, I know we say it a lot, think local.
Very well. Thank you. Yes. Barry. Hello. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, how are you, Chibo? I like your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Yes.
Sure. I'm Barry Bender. I'm the elections chairman here for the Green Party of New Jersey, and I happen to be the Green Party candidate for Congressional District 4 here in New Jersey. And I'm, chemicals, and I see it here constantly. Actually, there used to be in my town a small airstrip where they would fly and spray DDT. It was before my time, but I accidentally came across it picking cranberries, and then found out later on that those cranberries probably were infected with DDT. But I was wondering why the mosquitoes were dying when they bit me. It was very, But anyway, what I want to talk about is something that is close to home here. I live 1 mile from Oyster Creek Nuclear Generating Station, which is in the process of being decommissioned. Oyster Creek, I believe, was the oldest functioning nuclear generating station in the United States left. They're in the process of decommissioning, and there's a lot of stories about that. But again, I hear talk, and I'm dead set against fossil fuel. There's so many things that need to be done to eliminate fossil fuels from our life. But I don't think the answer is nuclear. And I've heard people talking about, well, now they have mini reactors and various new things. But the bottom line for me is this: when they can produce energy and nuclear energy without nuclear waste that's going to last thousands and thousands of years, then I'll be all for that. I mean, we have a lot of other alternatives, green energy from the sun, from windmills, water power, etc. But
30 seconds.
where I live, 10 seconds?
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. Thank you. Where I live, and it relates in some ways to what Chris spoke about. I mean, it's not as bad right now, but I'm being told eventually they're going to be taking these spent fuel rods and sending them somewhere else. Well, how are they going to get these spent fuel rods somewhere else? Are they going to put them on trains that derail? And you'll have, nuclear disasters all around the country. To me, what I'm stuck with here now is going to be with us for thousands and thousands of years, multiple generations. But we need to stop producing the nuclear waste because it's going to be here, and there's really nothing you can do with it at this point unless there's new science. So I wanted to talk about ending the talk about new nuclear power facilities, because again, there is no end to the plan. The waste is left, and we're stuck with it, and we will be leaving to hundreds of generations down the road. And thank you for the time. Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you for coming. Larry, I'd like to invite you up to the stage. Larry? Okay. If they come on, we'll let them come through. Bob, you are up next. Hi.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bob Suberi. And I'd first like to thank you all for attending this webinar and spending time with the panelists. And I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing your expertise. We're facing overwhelming challenges today with regard to the escalating atrocities perpetuated by our government, including environmental issues that we've been talking about, and also issues with regard to the threats of nuclear war and the genocide that's currently taking place. I am a member of the St. Louis Green Party, and I'm also a member of Veterans for Peace. Hi, Woody and Paul. I think we need to think, there are a lot of issues, and I think we need to break down what our part in this is in terms of what we can do. I mean, I see it as long-term actions and short-term relief, things that we can do immediately. I see the long-term actions as writing your senators, writing letters to the editor, articles, social media, etc., demonstrations, plug into organizations that are active on the ground. For example, my personal interest that I dedicate most of my time to is the Palestinian issue. I work with PSC, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, and Students for Justice in Palestine. Local actions, these organizations, there are plenty of others, but these organizations are very involved in local actions. Also boycotting. We can boycott. I was thinking of all the plastics that are being used in the packaging in Costco. I go to Costco, and it's just unbelievable. You buy a big box of cookies, and they wrap 2 cookies in a little plastic bag inside this big box. With regards to
Bob, your time's about up.
Okay, I'm just going to say this quickly. With regard to Palestine, people are suffering. They're the ones on the ground that are fighting this. We need to help them maintain. There are a number of organizations. If you want to call me or write me, you can probably get my email address through a number of people. Don Fitz specifically, but there are a number of organizations that provide relief on the ground. And with that, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Bob. Anna Lee. Cool beans. Okay, Keith. Hi.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can remember to bring you to the stage. Woo.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been very happy to hear others discuss the relationship between militarism and imperialism and environmental destruction. The American military-industrial complex is probably the most environmentally damaging institution anywhere in the world. And there's been a lot of recognition, of course, that the American military-industrial complex is responsible for grotesque human rights violations worldwide. But I think that there's probably less attention given to the environmental impact of American imperialism and then the actions of American client states. If you look at the various client states of the United States around the world, not only are some of them are states that have the worst human rights records, Israel is an obvious current present day example, but they're also some of the most environmentally unfriendly countries as well. For example, the Gulf states, the American client states in the Gulf are among the world's leading producers of fossil fuels, in addition to also being some of the world's leading violators of human rights, as we've seen, for example, in Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen in recent years. So these issues are all connected together. Whether it's human rights in Palestine, as the previous speaker mentioned, or whether it's militarism and imperialism, or whether it's environmental destruction, whether it's the nuclear threat, whether it's the someone mentioned uranium production earlier. Uranium production is done mostly to advance the American and Western nuclear arsenal. So all of these issues are connected together, and I'm glad to hear others discussing these. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Barbara.
Yes, hi. I'm with the Green Party of Pennsylvania, and I'm also with a group which you can see behind me here is called Save Our Streams PA, and we work on locating lost, orphan, and abandoned wells and trying to get them plugged and bring the information to the public about the wells that are spewing methane, ethane, sorted other compounds into our groundwater. Where I live, just about 5 miles from where I live is a major area where there are several wells leaking into a creek, which runs into the Allegheny River, which runs into the Mississippi River, etc.
Good job, Bob.
Also, yeah, and thank you.
You did
And
wonderful. Yay.
okay. Anyway, so also here, where I live here in Brookford, Pennsylvania, there are wells in front yards within 4 or 5 blocks of where I live. Also, where about 6 or 8 blocks from where I live is the beginning of a major oil refinery. It's in the middle of town, and it has a flare that is going. Yeah, and it has a flare going 24/7, and the EPA lets them get away with that, and the DEP rather, and it's pretty hard to fight, but I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Yes, you fight a good fight, and we'll keep that moving. I'd like to invite Kevin.
Okay. Am I unmuted? I'm looking at these things on the Zoom.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I'm with the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee. And, I heard the question from the gentleman from Maine, how do we pay for this? And I just thought, yeah, that's what I want to talk about. Actually, another thing too, the people, and so many of these stories are so wonderful, and the people working on behalf of the environment here are doing it as volunteers. But the people who are creating the pollution and who are promoting the pesticides and the herbicides and the toxic chemicals and putting plastics and forcing all this plastic stuff into packaging, etc., they are paid. They get a salary for doing that. So this is the way our system works. The people who are advancing the agenda of harmful and hateful corporations are paid to do it. And we are volunteers trying to do some good for the community and for human beings. So, there's something wrong with that picture. And what's wrong with it is the monetary system, which is the Federal Reserve monetary system. So I just want to get this point across because I know people don't relate the monetary system to the pesticide and herbicide problem, but I just, it does relate because everything, as you know, in this country revolves around money. So, it always ties into everything, but people don't don't make the direct connection. And all of these corporations, you know, if
Kevin,
you've
you
heard
got
of
30 seconds.
Okay, well, I just want to, if you look into the green revolution and the pesticide development, you will find the big banks are involved in there, and they coordinate the corporations, Monsanto, Dow Chemical, Syngenta, these other companies like that. So thanks very much, but do keep in mind that you want to put a dig in on the banking cartel whenever you can. I'm not trying to take your issue, but you know, remember, the banking cartel is making your life more difficult every day. Thank you.
I actually agree with that. Kevin, the Federal Reserve is a pain in our places. Randall, you will be our last commenter.
I don't think Randall is going to be joining us tonight. Okay.
Okay, cool beans. Well, we went through the list of invited commentators. We've learned a lot from our special guests, and we've learned and heard from our speakers. And I want to just take a moment and thank everyone who spoke today, and giving us knowledge, and for the St. Louis Greens to putting on the Black and Green webinar. Are there any last from the St. Louis Greens, an announcement that you would like us to use forth?
Just tune in on November 13th for the next program.
Okay, yes, yes, yes. Don't forget to vote and share this information. But yeah, November 13th will be the next Black and Green webinar.